Hello, this is Dr. Nancy Trimbley with your Healthcare Arsenal podcast. This podcast is designed for that person who knows there's a better way towards health and wellness. They just don't know what that better way is. And my hope for you is that with each passing episode, you get closer to being your own best expert. And in this case, I hope you get closer to being your own best expert for those children in your life. We have Dr. Tom Williams today, who practices chiropractic actually in two locations. One is just in the next town over from me. And I just happened to stumble upon Dr. Tom as I was going to one of my own healthcare appointments with my naturopath, Dr. Amy Allen, who you've heard on this podcast a couple of times. And and Dr. Tom went to Palmer Chiropractic College in Davenport, Iowa. And so he and I, me going to Life College in Marietta, he and I both come from like the same foundational, very strong principles of chiropractic. And I think Dr. Tom's the fourth or fifth chiropractor I've interviewed. And you may have noticed by watching the podcast that even though we are all chiropractors, we all are a little bit different in our approach and the types of patients that we love to work with. So, without giving anything else away, I want to introduce Dr. Tom Williams. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to speak about chiropractic in this, principled way, but more importantly, speak about health and healthcare for not only ourselves, but for our kids and for our babies and how we can support them differently. And so that's what we're going to really be talking about today is just being able to view our children from a different lens so that we can understand what are their challenges, what are these behaviors that they're having, and what do they mean? Because with my approach and the way that we view things is that there's no bad kids. There's just physiology that isn't working for them, and behavior is a response to that. And so that's where we need to set them up as providers, as parents, as teachers, as therapists, as whatever, so that we can just support them to grow and develop the way their body was designed to. And
Oh my gosh. This
that's
is
what
like
we're
mind
looking to do.
blowing because, I'm familiar with working with infants from an adjustment style. And of course, people, if they say an infant in their office, are like, oh my God, are you going to do an adjustment on that? Like, can
No.
you do that? How do you do that? And so, of course, the adjustment styles for infants are vastly different than what we use for adults. And it's kids love to be adjusted, but for
Mm-hmm.
our audience, like I was talking with Dr. Tom right before we press record, like, what do we title this? And he started just talking about some things. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be such a phenomenal conversation. So I want you to just roll with it. Tell us what you do.
Yeah, and so, usually we start by hoping to take care of women during pregnancy and even before that. We have a very sick society and we're wondering like, hey, why are our kids not doing well? Why are they having more and more diagnoses? And it's like, oh, it's the food, oh, it's the technology, they're lazy. And it's like all of those come into play, but we actually need to think even farther back to be like, how was mom and dad's health during preconception? Because that's
Hmm.
going to create the child. And then how were the stressors during pregnancy? How was mom supported during that time? And then how was the birth process? What were the options like for that? Were there tons of intervention? Because I see those as stress as a pediatric focused chiropractor, because they're entering into this world with hands on their head and it's stressful, and it not only impacts their spine, but it's going to impact their nervous system. It's going to impact their brain, their neurology, and it's going to push them into a state of stress, which is sympathetic dominance, which is your body's fight or flight response. And if we're dealing with that stress response, how well are we going to grow, develop, rest, digest? It's not as good as we want it to be. And so that's why I see a lot of infants and babies in my practice, because they're not sleeping well. They're not comfortable. They're tense. They're not latching or feeding well. They're not digesting their food well. And I never claim chiropractic as a cure for all things. What I look to do is find stress in the nervous system, improve that through adjustments, and let the body innately heal. And so that's where we deal with a lot of misconceptions of chiropractic, right? Like once you go, you always have to go. Or chiropractors think they can cure everything, but you'll never hear me say diagnose
Mm-mm.
or treatment in my practice, because I'm just trying to unlock that true potential for the nervous system and for the body to grow and develop. And if we don't see these types of kiddos early on, then we just start to see more challenges later on. And it's
More
like
and more and more
that's
stress.
right, because they're just developing under stress. And there's been studies done on kids like after the fact. They're like, what are these kiddos that are struggling now? What did they have before? And it was trauma in their life. Whatever that trauma was impacts the brain, and it's going to change how they're developing. And so that's where we can see kiddos coming in with, decreased focus, hyperactivity, sensory processing issues, and then seeing other issues that aren't just behavioral, but like chronic ear infections, chronic
Mm-hmm.
infections as a whole, digestive challenges. And so what I look to do is still do that assessment, assess the nervous system with some technology so that we can see how well is the body functioning. But now, more recently, over the past couple of years, I'm taking chiropractic kind of like to the next level with some other chiropractors in our group. And it's a full faceted approach of looking at the brain and how it's developing, because there's a lot of other programs out there and therapies that are kind of all encompassing and attacking it. And sometimes it's a little bit
Mm-hmm.
too much for the brain to process. And so that's where it's like, if we get too much demand on the brain, then it's going to start to have behaviors coming out, right? Like if we want a kid to sit still in class and read, but that's too much for their brain to handle, then they're going to have some kind of what they call deflection, which is a behavior. And that could be hyperactivity, like fidgeting, or it could be them blurting things out and being more verbal, and because that's where they kind of live. And so that's where there's a trajectory of development that starts out with primitive reflexes, which is like the moro, the startle response.
Mm-hmm. A
Place the
startle.
neck,
Mm-hmm.
startle, right? And so then there's like the asymmetric tonic neck reflex, which is another one. There's all these different primitive reflexes that are very important in infancy to help with survival, to help with feeding efficiency, to help with the birth process. But if they don't integrate or go away, then that's going to lead to stress on the brain. And so that's where we're seeing kiddos not having this integration of the primitive reflex, where it's not like they have the full-blown startle reflex where, they get scared and they go into extension and
Right.
then come back, but they have these little bits and pieces of it, which we need to test it more intricately to see that. And the reason why they didn't integrate was because their nervous system was under stress.
Wow. Okay, so for my audience, let me just kind of break this down. So, all chiropractors who are true chiropractors do adjustments on the spine to affect the nerve system, because the nerve system controls and coordinates all function, everything, everything, everything. So, brain controls all function of the body. The messages get to and from the body by going through the spinal cord and the nerves. Vertebrae of the spine gets subtly shifted out of alignment, that nerve cannot function properly. It's either hyper, it's either irritated and sending too many messages, or it's not sending the message it should. Either way, your body cannot function properly if the nerve system is affected by a spinal misalignment. So all true chiropractors are adjusting the spine to allow the body to function better, no matter what anybody's baseline is, no matter how old the human is. That is our job, is to realign the spine. So what Dr. Tom is saying, he's taking the neurology one step further and looking at these infants, which have very normal reflexes as infants that disappear as they get older. One of them is the Moreau reflex or startle reflex. So if you take a baby and you hold them on here and you just drop them suddenly, their arms will go out like this. It is a protection for the infant should the infant be falling. And again, that disappears over time. So what you're saying, Dr. Tom, is that for some children, because they are under multiple stresses before conception, when they're in utero, during the birth process, and they're in this state of stress. So we call that that we're sympathetic dominant. Sympathetic equals flight or fight response. So is it my thinking right that they're still kind of in this a slight panic state, kind of as a constantly, so these reflexes never quite disappear like they're supposed to? Is that right?
Right, right. And so they don't integrate efficiently. And so that's where you don't see
Integrate.
them full blown, but you need to do some digging to be able to find them still there. And so
Interesting.
if these primitive reflexes are still there, we're going to see kiddos that have more impulsivity, more emotional instability, because they're more living in their primitive brain. It's like they're living
Right.
in their brain stem, right? And so that's where they're living in a way where they're just like not fully emotionally stable. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of that present. And more kids than you think would have these present based on how stressful of a world we live in now,
Right.
especially now. And
Right.
so that's where now I'm actually doing this developmental exam on every child 5 and older coming in, because it's like I'm not waiting to see like, oh, do the parents want to do this special program with me? No, we need to do the exam so that we can actually see what's going on. How does it change through chiropractic initially? Are we starting to see some things integrate because we get the nervous system to start shifting to a more balanced state where we're not stuck in fight or flight, but bringing it back towards that balance? And
Wow.
then when it's time, because we've tilled the soil with chiropractic, it's now ready for change. That's when we start this more brain development work, where I give parents a at-home games and exercise program focused on the brain so that they can do this with their kids 5 minutes a day, not full-blown therapy, because usually that's a lot of stress on their body, and it can do great things, but sometimes it's just too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm seeing that with some of the kiddos in my practice that have gone through all these different routes, and they're finally starting to get the results because they've been under chiropractic. And then they're starting to do it in the right order, because there's
Mm.
an order for development of primitive reflexes. And then we have these like tools in movement, touch, and then it goes auditory, verbal, and then visual cognition, which is like your mind's eye, being able to predict the future and understand what's coming next. And
Wow.
so it's not visual acuity, but like, can I process and predict what's going to happen? And that's what we see a lot with kiddos, right? Is that they have a hard time transitioning, or they have a hard time with change because they can't predict what's going to happen next. And so that, what do? They revert back to their deflected state, and they're going to grasp that control back, right? Because they feel safe there. And so
Right.
that's where there's kids all throughout this trajectory, and it's like, where are they living in that? Are they stuck in the primitive reflexes, or are they stuck in movement, touch, right? Like, there's some kiddos that are just going to run in and they're going to touch every single thing when they come in. They're going to jump on the couch, they're going to try and grab the shelf, they want to grab the books, they see the clock, and they're like, I'm going to touch everything, because that's where they live. But and they're just like trying to feel it all right, they're rubbing their hand on the wall. There's a thing that we can think about. It's like, we have that kiddo that comes into a big room with all these different textures and all these different things to touch, and he's touching them all. But I walk in that same room and I'm just observing things, and I'm just looking at them, I'm seeing all the surfaces, and I'm able to process things as well. When Johnny walks into that room and when I walk into that room, who touches more things? What do you think, Dr. Nancy?
Well, he does. Johnny does.
He touches more things with his hand, right?
Right.
But I already know what the texture of that wall is based on my visual
Ah,
perception, my
right.
visual cognition. I know what the chair feels like. So I touch more things in a more efficient way. And so that's
Oh,
where
I got you.
we're able to help kiddos move through development more efficiently so that they can be more efficient, because they're not broken, they're just not functioning like they should.
Right.
And so
Give
that's
me
where we do that.
give me an example of one of the homework games that a parent and child might do.
Yeah, so one of the basic ones that we start with, because we start at the simplest level because of that developmental hierarchy. And so if a kiddo has primitive reflexes present still, we start there because that's a foundational piece. And if we're trying to move through development and have them do higher level things like academics and sitting still and reading and
Right.
writing and all of that, then it's like that foundational piece is just built on rock, sandy soil or rocky
Yeah.
soil. And
Yeah.
so that's where one of the first exercises they do is to help integrate Moro. And the test for Moro is to point your toes in and to point your toes out, standing up straight with your hands by your side. And the positive is based on what your hands and what your upper body does when
I
you're doing
love
that.
that.
And so it's really telling. And so it'll be fun for you to see that in practice. And I can give you an example too. But actually, I'll stand
So
up.
yeah,
So,
so if you have the child stand still and turn their toes in and out in their foot, if they can't separate that from their upper body,
right. And so if I say, point your toes out, Johnny, and he's looking and he's trying to point his toes out, if he has Moro present, he's going to start coming like this. And he's
oh my
like,
gosh.
I can't do it. Like, oh
Oh
yeah,
my
look it,
gosh, that's
I'm doing it. And they're just like full extension. Their body's leaning back. Their palms are coming open to the front and coming out. And they're even sometimes like about to fall over. And I'm like, okay, great job. Point your toes in now. And sometimes they're like, I don't know how to do that. And sometimes they're even just thinking about doing it and they're coming here, which
oh
is
my
the
gosh.
positive, meaning Moro is still present. And so it's flexion when their toes come in, extension when their
Oh
toes come
my
out.
gosh.
And so one of the exercises is doing that, but like sitting on your butt and putting your hands on the ground and pointing your toes out and holding it, pointing your toes in and holding it, and just doing that back and forth while keeping your hands flat so that you're not allowing your upper body to
Right.
like do what it was trying to do before. And then you add complexity to it by like holding a bar and doing it, and then standing up and marching forward with your toes in and marching backwards with your toes out. And so that's where the exercise track has all of, like, track one is all Moro, the startle reflex, and it just takes it one step further each video. And we are only doing 1 or 2 videos per day, and you're going to continue to do those until you start seeing it become easier for them to do, where
Yeah.
they're not like bending and trying to like really struggle with
Right.
it.
So when I think about that, I think, okay, we're going to introduce this. That just turning the toes in or out was like, it was adding an impulse to reinstigate that sympathetic flight or fight reflex, and now it's almost like we're telling the brain, you are safe, we can do this,
Right.
and everything's okay. But starting off sitting with the child with their legs out in front of them so that they can see that happening and they know everything's good. So it's almost like, yeah, you have to coax the brain into recognizing this
Right.
is not a time for flight. It's okay.
Right. It's
That's
really rewiring it, right? Because it's like, it's
mhm.
not a conscious thought at all. It's all primitive, it's all subconscious, things just happening. And so that's where these exercises work to reintegrate it, rewire it innately so that we can just see those changes moving forward. And I've had personal experience with this program with my son, and started doing them. And we were doing this program specifically for him because he developed a stutter out of nowhere. Like, it came on like that. And there's a whole lot of reasons why we think that might have happened for him. But it's like, that was our goal, is like, we need to help his brain, help his stutter. And it was like, it's not working. It's not working. And I'm doing it for months with him. It's not working. It's like, okay, I fly him out to the doctor that I learned under. She's like, oh yeah, he's got quite a bit going on there and you're on the right pace. And it's like, we're probably like 6 months in after that point, and the holidays came around and we're like, okay. And Oliver was more of a sensitive kiddo around his cousins, like easily overstimulated by a raging bull that's just like all these kiddos full of energy. And so he would have some outbursts of like overwhelm and wanting to retreat. And we didn't see the stuttering improve, but what we did see is him be able to self-regulate, manage his cousins or other kids more efficiently, and be able to communicate better through that stressful time period. So it's like, okay, we're not necessarily, that's a thing about this type of work and about chiropractic is like, we don't always see the results we want when we want,
Right.
but there's going to be improvements. And we just need to be ready to observe what those look like. And we have to be patient. And so that's where the body can change, the brain can change, behaviors can change without actually parenting the behavior side of it.
Wow. That and I think that's where parents have so much frustration. Like, how many times do I have to tell you just to chill out? Or how many times do I have to tell you just to sit still?
Yeah.
And it's not a conscious thing. This is unconscious, primal brain function.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
that's
mean,
amazing.
it's an emotional thing. The whole reason why I take care of kids is to take kids with sensory processing, autism, ADHD. Like that's what lit my fire to take care of kids. And so that's where I have a lot of passion for that.
Wow.
And I feel the, strife and anguish for parents when they're like, I don't know what to do for this child. And they even tell me that when we talk about it, like, mommy, I don't want to do it, but I just have to. And it's
Oh,
just like the heartbreak that it's just there. It's like there's a fire burning inside of them and they can't put it out and we can't put it out with words. And so it's like we have to put it out by starting from the basics and supporting them through that to be able to improve.
wow. Wow, that's so profound and so true. And it's honestly so much why I do this podcast is because there is such a wealth of healing and healing opportunities all around us. And it's just that you do not have the voice to like broadcast that because this world is so inundated with conventional medical model and big pharma and like and it's and people don't even know there's a better way. And literally, you're right outside my back door. Like
Mm-hmm.
I can think of kids in my office that I'm gonna tell the mom, you know what? I want you to go see Dr. Tom. I have a little nephew that I'm gonna suggest. You don't need to go see Dr. Tom because this is like such awesome work. So,
Thank
um,
you.
oh, there's my little dog just
I,
walked in the room.
I saw it.
Brooklyn. Everybody knows Brooklyn. So tell us what your favorite, like when you see an incoming new patient, um, tell us what that little one looks like or is exhibiting. Tell us a story about that.
That's a hard one because there's just so many levels of it. It's like I feel like the favorite one is kind of the hardest one
Yeah.
because it's the one that is lost, that the parents are lost. They don't have answers. They've been given answers by their medical doctor saying this is what you have to do, and they've been doing it for years, and their child is still struggling, and they've seen some improvement, but they're just like they're there. I can see them, but I don't know how to get them out. And so it's those kiddos that are, probably have a ADHD or sensory processing or autism diagnosis. And they've been trying things and they're just looking for something different because they're at their wits' end. It's not that I want them to be suffering. I wish they weren't. And honestly, these are the hardest ones to take care of and the hardest ones to keep coming in and being patient because it's just so complex.
life is
But
complex. Yeah.
but those are the ones that when we start, I don't know what's going to happen. I just know that they're going to be better and that they're going to be more connected to the world around them. And I have the highest hope for healing for anybody coming in. And so we, get them started. We assess their nervous system, whatever that looks like, right? When I take care of these more complex cases, I might not be able to do a real exam. I might just be observing because they're so under stress, you know, with a meltdown. They don't trust anyone. We just have to connect, and then we just start that adjustment process. And I use some more non-traditional chiropractic techniques that allow it to be efficient and quick, but we're adjusting them regularly, 2 times a week, 3 times a week, maybe. Just depends on what they need and what we can do. And then we're going to be starting a process for these more complex cases where we're in it for a few months to a year with the true understanding of like, hey, we're going to reset this nervous system, reset this brain, and see the changes that we're looking for. And usually it starts out as a fight where the kiddo is having a hard time regulating, and we do one adjustment per visit, and somehow we get that with them playing, being distracted. And I can remember back in the beginning of practice when I was like chasing kids around the office and having some really complex cases, and now I don't feel like I have to as much.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very thankful that I've gotten even better at getting those adjustments done in those stressful times. But like the most complex cases are the nonverbal autistic kiddos that are expressing some of those behaviors and tendencies. And through care, we can get them to start slowing down, start having less meltdowns, start having better eye contact, start
Mm-hmm.
saying words, to having full-blown conversations. And that's some
Mm-hmm.
of the like why I do what I do and why I have struggled in business to try and really take care of kids rather than typical back pain, because it doesn't work the way that we want it to. And so that's where it's just been a grind to be able to support those families and be that voice and be that change that their child needs, and the support that you're doing what you need to, and we just need to continue.
Right, right. So true. When we make that adjustment, all we are doing is opening up the channels of the nerve influence so the body can make its own changes and its own healing, and it's in its own time, which is difficult in a world where you can drive up to one window and get $300 cash, drive up to another window, get a horrible non-food breakfast. But anyway, it's breakfast. And so we're like instant, and our body doesn't work like that.
Right.
Yeah. And that can be a challenge, especially when you're dealing with stressors that have been in place, ever since this child was formed. Um, I would say, and just to like mirror something you said, I had an autistic boy coming to my practice years ago, and nonverbal. He was probably about 12 or 14, so he was tall and gangly. And when he came in for his second adjustment, he came over and he kissed me.
Yeah.
And the mom just like burst into tears. She's like,
Right.
"Oh my gosh, he doesn't touch. He doesn't touch
Yeah.
people."
Yeah.
And it was, and how much did he actually change over the course of his care? Probably to an outside observer, not a lot. But when you open that doorway and he's able to now at least accept other people and accept a little bit of touch, I mean, that's huge for that child.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's very, very cool. Very, very cool. So, I know you have two offices. You have one in Chicago and you have one here in Northwest Indiana. Um, Tell me about that. What do you see as the positive things about that? And what do you see as the differences between the two locations, which are
Mm.
probably like a 35, 40-minute drive, maybe?
They're an hour and 20 minutes apart.
Ooh, okay. All right, that's a bit.
Yeah.
But suburban versus urban.
Yeah, very different. It was actually a very interesting transition because I moved my family out of Chicago. We live downtown right by the practice. My practice is in Lincoln Park, which is on the north side. I walked to work. It was amazing.
Very
And
cool.
then, we decided after COVID and during COVID that we were like, we're done with Illinois. And so that's why we moved to Indiana. And I had people traveling all the way from Indiana into my Chicago practice because of the approach that we take and how we're so different. And I was curious what it would be like to open a practice in Indiana and how the people would be different too, because honestly, like Chicago's a grind, it's a struggle. It's really hard to create a solid base because a chiropractic practice, when you practice this way, you need your members. You need your lifetime members that are going to stay with you forever. And you're just trying to continue to build that base. But Chicago is super stressful and parents are super stressed. And my ideal client is somebody that's very holistically minded, or at least open to something more holistic. And they value their care. They're willing to put their money to it. I don't necessarily take care of only affluent individuals. So it's like I had a very, very diverse practice in Chicago, but my ideal client left. They just would be with me for a long time and then they would move. And they wouldn't just necessarily move out of the city, but they would move out of the state. And so
Right.
I had a really hard time keeping my lifetime clients, but then also keeping people under corrective care and moving to wellness because they're just so inundated with stress, the busy lifestyle. 2 miles, it can take 30 minutes and it's like bumper to
Yeah.
bumper. And so I get it. It's hard. And that's how I felt from Chicago and being like, I don't know. And just getting referrals for me in Chicago was super difficult because all the circles were so small that people lived in and they didn't touch. No one knew anybody. No one knew anybody in my practice, right? Whereas I opened my Indiana practice in Crown Point, just kind of like fell into opportunities in Crown Point. It quickly it just grew because people weren't moving. The people that didn't value the care anymore, they stopped, and that's fine. And I have a model that allows them to do that for their care, and they're satisfied with what they've got out of it. But the people that stay longer, and the people that come in just stay longer too, because some people are busy, but they understand that they're going to drive 15 minutes to 30 minutes to their appointment that they go to, and it's not high stress. I have more financial conversation, like more financial stress in Northwest Indiana versus Chicago, but that's just like different demographic. And my prices are still very affordable for people with my membership model that we have. But people just stay longer. They're more gentle. They're not as, it's just a very different subset of person and the stress that they live in and how they're going to experience the world.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's where like Indiana's been close to 40% of my revenue within one short year, honestly, without any major marketing or networking.
Right.
So
it's phenomenal. Good for you. One of the things I love, what I've seen when I've been, going in to see Dr. Allen when you've been working is that everybody's carrying a baby carrier with an infant in it.
I see a lot. I started seeing a
love
lot
that.
more babies the past year or two, which has been really, really interesting because so I've been in practice 7.5, almost 8 years now in Chicago. And so I saw a lot of those kiddos that I wanted to, like, the 3 to 7-year-old sensory hyperactivity. That's how it all kind of started. And it's like, I would get some babies, but then 4 years in, 5 years in, it really flip-flopped where it was like I was having a really hard time getting those kids that I really want to help and getting a lot more babies, which was like new to me. It was like we always wanted babies, and now I'm like inundated with babies and colic and reflux and latch issues and tongue ties and all this stuff. And so Indiana has a very different drive with babies and getting care, which has been interesting to see. And obviously, since I brand myself very differently in who I take care of and how I take care of people, it's like it makes it a good fit because I don't do all of the other stuff. So
Right.
people they search for pediatric chiropractor and they see our practice, and all they see is kids in pregnancy, and they're like, that looks safe.
Right.
Versus a lot of the like, oh, person bent over with back pain and
Right.
therapy and supplements, and like, you might take care of kids, but so that's where it's been a
Good.
blessing. And that's where I also partnered with some lactation consultants here in Northeast Indiana, which have been a great referral source. And they're
Yeah.
amazing, amazing, amazing providers.
Yeah, when we go off air, I'll make sure that you know of a couple of midwives, and there's a
We're using one. Did you know we're pregnant?
oh, congratulations.
We're about to have a baby.
Will this be 3 for you?
Baby three,
Yeah.
home birth with Terry.
Oh, I'm so excited for you. What month are you expecting?
End of April.
Congratulations. April is a
Thank
very good month. That's so awesome. So I do want to ask one more question. Actually,
you. Yeah.
two more. One more is in the show notes, you gave me a link to videos to share with
Mhm.
our audience. What's in those videos?
Yeah, and so those videos, it's a webinar series. It's based on brain development. It's great to watch those because it talks about that hierarchy of development that I was talking about so that you can look at kids differently with their
Ooh,
behaviors, with how they're acting, with how they're moving through development, and some ways to support them in a little bit of a different way. And so it's not a chiropractic talk. There will be a small amount of chiropractic in there, but it's more about brain development with children. And so that's something that we put together so people can understand how should we be looking at these kiddos in a different way, and how can we support them well so that we know how to parent well and lead them well.
that's phenomenal. That's what all parents want. That's what they
Right.
want. Yeah,
I know.
they want healthy, well-adjusted kids that they can just help with and assist them through life. I love it. I love it. All right, one more question for you. If you had a billboard for all to see,
Oh,
what would
geez.
it say?
Think about that all the time. I don't know what to put on it. I just had a daycare open up and across the street in Chicago. I'm like, what should I put on my front window so that these parents see it? I'm like, I don't know what would make the difference, for people to be able to find it. And for a billboard for something for all to see, what would I want it to say? For me, I feel like it would have to do with something in terms of like just raising a question for them to come inquire more. Not necessarily that I don't want it to scream the answer at them, because then they can, their misconceptions or their preconceptions, which aren't necessarily wrong because of the societal norms that have been set on that, would be something on like, wanting to ask the question of how to raise healthy kids and support them well, to love them well, and to have them more connected to the world around them. And so it'd have to do something with that. It's hard for me to come up with that one liner. I'm an analytical, and so it's hard for me the done beats perfect approach is not my forte. And so that's what I would have to be pondering on, is like, how could I get that message of raising the question of how are we supposed to raise healthy kids in society
Oh,
today, and then having people look for more.
I think that's it. How are we supposed to raise our kids, healthy kids in this environment? Something like that. It's been phenomenal to talk to you, Dr. Tom. I learned so much today, and I know my audience has as well. So, for our audience out there, this has been your healthcare arsenal. And as always, my hope for you is that with each passing episode, you get closer to being your own best expert. Bye for now.